Tēnā koutou katoa and welcome everyone. We're going to begin this webinar with an opening karakia. Tuia ki ronga, tuia ki raro, tuia ki roto, tua ki waho. Ka rongo ti ao, ka rongo te pō, haumio ki huie tai ki e. Unite above, unite below, unite without, unite within. Listen to the night, listen to the world. Now we come together as one. Kia ora. Thanks, Eve. I'm just going to breathe and let loose from the day that has gone before as we come together for this session. Kia ora, everyone. Ko Bev Cho Hong toka ingoa. My name is Bev Cho Hong. And on behalf of Community Research and Tahono Inclusive Aotearoa Collective, we bring you this online webinar, Ethnic Communities, Sense of Belonging and Te Tiriti. I am the Katohono Ethnic Research Engagement Lead at Community Research, and I will be facilitating this session. First, I'm going to do some brief introductions of our 4 thought leaders for this webinar. And the format for the webinar will be first some background information from Anjum, and then we've got a couple of questions to pose. What role does Te Tiriti play and how is it relevant to ethnic communities in Aotearoa? And panel members will each provide a few comments and have a bit of a kororo, followed by space for questions and answers with attendees. So throughout, we invite you to pose your questions through the Q&A function on your screens. The second question which we will be asking is, from an aspirational point of view, what would a Te Tiriti-based Aotearoa look like in 2040? And a similar format with each of the panel members making some comments, and then an opportunity for questions posed through the Q&A function and a kororo around that. So firstly, I'd like to introduce our thought leaders for this webinar. Really pleased to bring this diverse group of people together. I'm going to introduce them in backwards alphabetical order, given all our promos have been in forward alphabetical order. So Vera Paki is an award-winning first-generation Congolese Kiwi activist and storyteller, raised in Taimaki, Makaurau, and based in Te Whanganui, Tara. Vera is the Youth Engagement Coordinator at Save the Children New Zealand and is passionate about youth advocacy in the public spheres. Ganesh Ahirao, who's also known as Ganesh Nana. Ganesh's parents migrated from India to New Zealand as young newlyweds some 70 years ago. Brought up in Whakatiki, Upper Hutt, Ganesh got a degree in economics and has since accumulated 40 years of experience and knowledge as a professional economist and researcher. He's had positions in consultancy, academia, and in the public service. Our third panel speaker is Danny. Danny is of Cantonese, Maniapoto, Ngā Puhi, Te Rarawa, Ngāti Whātua, Te Kapotai, Te Honi Honi descent. It's Reverend Deacon Danny Karatia Goddard. He's the co-chief executive of the Sisters of Compassion Group Aotearoa New Zealand and the Pacific. He's the chief Māori advisor to the New Zealand Catholic Bishops' Conference and Vicar for Māori in the Catholic Archdiocese of Wellington and Diocese of Palmerston North. He served on the Executive Committee Secretariat of the Tangjung Association of New Zealand and is a member of the New Zealand Chinese Association. Anjum Rahman, our 4th panel member, is a founder and facilitator at Tahono Trust, Inclusive Aotearoa Collective. It's an organisation that works to build belonging and inclusion for all communities of Aotearoa New Zealand, which includes Te Tiriti education and work across diverse communities in Aotearoa. So what I'm focusing on is to move through quite quickly to allowing our esteemed panel members to provide comment. But firstly, I'd like to ask Anjum to provide some background context for us for this webinar.
Ora koutou, welcome and thank you for joining us today. What I thought I might do to lead into our discussion is provide some context so that we can understand a little bit around what was happening in terms of the history of Aotearoa and the impacts of that history. What I won't be doing is going through the articles of Te Tiriti or going into very much detail, but it's more a general context around when it was signed and what happened after. So when we think about the 1800s in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we started that century with a greater interaction with Europeans and Maori. Mostly that interaction happened with whalers, sealers, gold mining, and missionaries. And particularly in Kororareka, or what you might know as Russell, was a key place of European settlement. And when Charles Darwin came through, his comment about Kororareka then was that it was the hellhole of the Pacific. And the reason that he said that was because there was no governance of those settlers. There was absolute lawlessness. There were no laws that guided how they should interact with each other or how they should interact with Maori. What we also saw prior to the 1840s was that Maori were developing a strong trading and exporting economy. And so they were growing produce and they were exporting it overseas. They were traveling. So we had Maori chiefs visiting England, visiting the reigning monarch of the day. What we also saw, particularly in the 1820s and part of the 1830s, was the musket wars. So as Maori acquired firearms, the musket wars meant for them a huge loss of life. And in terms of their trading activities, they found that they were unable to port ships in New South Wales because they didn't have a flag. And so all of those things led to the chiefs of the northern tribes, or iwi, in 1835 to develop He Whakaputanga, which is the Declaration of Independence. And that's when they agreed on the Confederate flag as a flag for Aotearoa, New Zealand. Now, He Whakaputanga is actually a legal document because it was signed by King William IV, but it wasn't taken around the country in the same way that Te Tiriti was. But we should also note that actually the Northern Chiefs have been meeting together since around 1808. So they were already used to meeting together and deciding affairs. I wanted to quickly shift into us thinking about what was the global context prior to when Te Tiriti was signed. And I wanted to start with the papal bulls of the 15th century, which developed the doctrine of discovery. And this was a series of proclamations, but effectively it was giving permission to Christians, and particularly Western European nations, the ability to discover lands, claim them, and then exploit them. And it was done on a basis of superiority, and that the Christian religion be exalted and be everywhere increased and spread, and the health of souls be cared for, and that barbarous nations be overthrown and brought to the faith itself. So there was inherent in it a racial superiority, and that these people needed to be conquered and looked after. And so they felt this sense of comfort in coming to a place and taking the land. There was also this notion of terra nullius, which means nobody's land, effectively. So not where they saw that nobody was occupying the land, they felt they had the right to take it. So those were kind of the values, as it were, that sat underneath what happened here as well. And also globally, what was happening is things like the East India Company and the colonization of South Asia, colonization of other parts of Asia and Africa. We had the transatlantic slave trade and all that entailed. Next door to us, we had the colonization of Australia, mass murder of First Nations people there. In the United States, they tried different tactics where they used to mass murder all the buffaloes because they knew the First Nations people used that for both clothing and food. And also in Europe, leading into some of this was the witch burnings, in which an estimated 8 million women were killed. And it was that period that really enforced a patriarchal culture as well as the colonizing culture. So we had all of these things that were happening as we went into 1840 and the signing of Te Tiriti. And Te Tiriti really was about the protection of land, protection from foreign occupation, because Maori could see what colonization was looking like around the world, and internally for them, trying to move away from the loss of life from the musket wars. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen to give you an indication, and these are going to be just a couple of population slides. Try that. Yes. And the reason why I want to show this is for people to understand what a massive shift it was. So these are the estimated populations around the timing of Te Tiriti, and this is the most conservative estimate. Some other estimates have the Maori population up to around 200,000, but regardless, let's take the most conservative. You can see what it is there, and you can imagine that these 80,000 did not at any point imagine that this 2.4% would be given the right to own all their land and all of their resources. By 1896, the population of Maori has dropped and almost halved if we take the most conservative estimate. If we take a greater estimate, this is effectively a genocide, because naturally populations increase. So they should have seen an increase in population. So just very quickly, what explained this shift was diseases brought into the country, like syphilis and various other diseases. In the 1860s, we had the New Zealand Land Wars. We had Edward Gibbon Wakefield and the New Zealand Company, which had mass shipping, like ships of 20,000 people at a time coming into the country. And we had mass migration, particularly from the United Kingdom into the country, that brought that Pakeha number up. And for Maori, what we also had was poverty and the loss of land. And I'm just going to very quickly, sorry, I'm just going to give you very quickly, sorry, wrong slide, give you an indication of what that looked like visually. And that started in 1860, when they'd already lost quite a bit. So, and with the loss of land is the loss of resource, food, forestry, all of that went with it. And so when we look at where we are now, and I'll just finish up here, we've gone with the 2018 census because we don't yet have the population projections from the 2023 census. And actually what the 2023 census shows is this process of fewer Pakeha has accelerated a lot more than what was expected. But what this is showing us is that our future also contains a huge demographic shift that we are going to have to adjust to, and what that means for Te Tiriti, and particularly for our ethnic minority communities growing, Maori also growing, but how this side of that graph is going to get on. And I think that is the space where this conversation really needs to go. So I'll stop there and head back to you, Bev. I hope that was helpful for people.
Kia ora, Anjum. Thank you very much for that sort of entree into our kōrero today. We're very conscious that there is already quite a lot of literature out there around Te Tiriti itself and other aspects and conversations. So we do encourage you to have a look at those. What we wanted to do at this webinar was really focus on some key thoughts and considerations for thinking about this space and sense of belonging for ethnic communities. So with that, I'm going to shift now to posing the first question to the panel, which is, what role does Te Tiriti play and how is it relevant to ethnic communities in Aotearoa? So I'm going to start by asking Vera if she would begin with a few words. Welcome, Vera.
Kia ora. Thank you so much, Viv. And thank you, Anjum, for the amazing background. It's such a compelling question, and I really appreciate you asking because over the course of my time living in Aotearoa, New Zealand, that answer has changed really dramatically for me. Recognizing my background as an asylum seeker, not exclusively as a refugee, my introduction and education about Te Tiriti o Waitangi was exclusively in school. And you can imagine what type of representation that gave to me, which was that Te Tiriti o Waitangi is an incredibly abstract concept. It is historical and it is exclusively bicultural. So this was an issue that existed exclusively between Pākehā and Māori. And what that left me with the impression is that one, Te Tiriti o Waitangi, or the Treaty of Waitangi as it was taught to me, belonged in the past, was not a conversation for me to be involved in, and that I was given permission to clock out, essentially. And there was zero expectation for me to ever meaningfully engage with Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And if I didn't say anything, no one else would say anything. And that was concerning revelation when I started to undertake work with other young ethnic migrants and refugees, when I understood that this was not an isolated experience. For most of us, we understood that there was no place for us within the Te Tiriti conversation. And we were also in a position where our elders who had recently migrated or who had sought refuge in Aotearoa, New Zealand, were also not in the position to educate us on our role as tauiwi, on how we should show up and what it means to stand in solidarity. So we were left in an incredibly difficult position to navigate for ourselves what it means to meaningfully engage, to be a good Te Tiriti partner without really knowing what that looks like or having that role modeled for us. So something that really comes out it was through the relationships that we managed to build within the other young people within our community. It was through the scholarship that we've been able to undertake, either through our own community groups or in traditional educational structures, and then the experiences that we've been able to have over our time spent in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I know for me that I've had such compelling experiences connecting outside in nature, in the bush, on the marae, where I've been able to truly understand my positionality as someone who lives in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and how relevant Te Tiriti is to me, because it is the document that guarantees my right to be in Aotearoa. Without it, I cannot be here. And any attack on Te Tiriti o Waitangi doesn't just influence or affect Māori, it affects all of us. Because also under our institutions of colonization, of white supremacy, we are all under attack together, essentially. So for me, now more than ever, and in the work that I've been able to undertake, Te Tiriti o Waitangi for ethnic communities who decide to call Aotearoa home is one of our #1 priorities. It is something that is that cannot ever be put on the back burner for us, and it gives us actually a great and clear direction of how to put our energies as a community when we're thinking of our intersectional advocacy together. So that's just the beginning of my thoughts. I know I'm going to have some more time, but kia ora, thank you so much to allow me to kick off.
Kia ora, thank you, Vera. And I think that was very rich. You're short, you covered a lot of territory in that space, but I think the one thing that often resonates is that idea of where do I fit within this conversation for Te Tiriti? Is it, are we part of that, and how do we position ourselves with respect to it? Thank you very much. I'm now going to shift to welcome Danny to make a few opening comments about this question.
大家好，我叫德龍，我媽媽係中國廣東人，我爸爸係毛利帕基亞人。I just want to thank you, Anjum, for your fantastic summary, very detailed, and I just want to hold those dates that you shared, especially 1835 and 1840, as I just share a bit from the Chinese community here today, and just greet my panel members. But also, it looks like more than 100 other people have joined our webinar today. And Bev, thank you for bringing us together. I think I have a slide that's going to be shared. Thank you. I just want to share with you today from a Chinese and a Cantonese perspective, the early settlers who came to New Zealand mainly came from southern China, from Guangdong or Guangzhou. And so the first Cantonese Chinese person to arrive in New Zealand arrived in 1842. So we've been part of Aotearoa New Zealand for a long time and woven into the fabric here. And certainly through other historical events. I want to share with you that Chinese, Cantonese, and Chinese people know what it is to be colonized. Firstly, and if you follow the screen there, you can see there's a man at the top there, Paul Hopkin, and he arrived as a cabin boy here in New Zealand in 1842. So we have been here for a long time. On the screen there, you'll see there's some numbers, some dates, 1850 to 1910. And the Chinese had already been colonized by imperial forces. And you can see there between the British and other of their foreign kin, they had already through imperial means colonized China, and really, if you look at today, they colonized China by forcing China to open its ports to trade, and even of those who follow Donald Trump, things haven't changed very much. They had tariffs running, and it was all about really profiteering from China's natural resources. So China knows very well what it is to be colonized, and right between that period of 1850 to 1910, those imperialists really came in and profiteered from taking Chinese resources. So those are major dates. In 1937, then China then was colonized again during the Japanese occupation of China, and you might remember the last emperor, Puyi, and Puyi, because he was Manchurian, he took advantage of the situation, and through Manchuria or Manchukuo, they colonized the north of China, and the Japanese came south through China, and there were some terrible atrocities, and many of you would be aware of that. But we go to 1839, and you can imagine also what was happening in Aotearoa, New Zealand at that stage between 1937 and 1939. We had the Opium Wars, and that's where Britain again bombed Guangzhou, or our port, our southern Chinese port, and forced the trade of opium into China. And really, a lot of our southern Chinese, Cantonese kin became dependent on opium, and it pacified our people. And again, Britain forced themselves to open ports and to again take resource off through China and reinforce tariffs. One of the big outcomes from the Opium War, of course, is that as a punishment, the British government took Hong Kong away from China for 100 years, and that has just been returned in recent years. So again, the Opium War, 1839, and just going back to Anjum again, we know what was happening in Aotearoa, New Zealand around that period. My understanding is that Māori was still very much the majority, but they could see these colonizers arriving in huge numbers. In 1842, the Nanjing Treaty was the same type of thing. The Nanjing Treaty was all about Britain forcing themselves into Nanjing and again imposing tariffs and taking resources and opening Nanjing as a trading place of trade for themselves, again, to take Chinese resource away. So the Nanjing was in 1842, only 2 years after the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi. And at the bottom of your screen on the left-hand side, you'll be able to see the Poltex reference. It was the Chinese Poltex Heritage Trust. And the Poltex and the Yellow Peril, many of you would have heard about, where Aotearoa New Zealand really expected the Chinese who came here during the gold rush days, like Bev and our great-grandparents, arrived here to dig gold in the South Island. And at that time, the Yellow Peril, or the Poltex, or the scare of the Yellow Peril of having these foreign Chinese come in, Chinese were taxed huge amounts of money to enable them to come here. I think our Chinese ancestors were really sojourners. They expected to come here and go home, but of course many of them became impoverished and really got stuck here. So again, New Zealand imposed the Poltex, and many of you would be aware of the Poltex. So another face of racism, really. And finally, in 1987, I think it was 1986, formal diplomatic relationships between New Zealand and the People's Republic of China were established. In 1987 onwards, we had a different type of flow or wave of Chinese come to New Zealand, and they came from basically northern China. And those people were looking for, who weren't Cantonese, were looking for opportunities to come here and study and take back their new learnings to China. So I suppose what I'm sharing with you today is that the Chinese have been here for a long, long time, part of the fabric of the community, but very much know what it is to be colonised. Thank you, Bev.
Kia ora, thank you very much, Danny, in covering that territory of the rich history and the background, because I think that's part of what we don't have time for in this webinar, really, is that looking at the diverse communities and all of the journeys and stories which bring us to the space of Aotearoa as our home. Just like to remind people that if they've got any questions that they'd like to pose, to use the Q&A function with all the rich sharing and insights that are being covered and raised by the panel. So I'm now going to ask Ganesh if he would please like to share his thoughts with the group.
Thank you, Bev. Kia ora tātou, and it's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for the opportunity, and tautoko Anjum's introduction, I suppose, and the contributions from Vera and Danny. And I suppose, pick up from Vera in terms of the experience of Te Tiriti through the education system, and mine undoubtedly predated yours, Vera, and I didn't know a thing about the treaty. It didn't exist in the New Zealand landscape of the country that I grew up, the country I was born in, and the country I grew up in, and it was, for all intents and purposes, non-existent. It wasn't relevant, and nobody cared about it. And that was precisely because of the world that I was living in, which was Pākehā and migrant community, the migrant community being the Indians who came in with my parents a long time ago. And we were, whether we were Pākehā or migrants, we were not encouraged to even think about, let alone be taught about Te Tiriti or even Māori. But my experiences were, I suppose, travelled along and thrown out the window when I did engage with Māori later on, post my education system, I suppose, and the opening up of the New Zealand history, as Anjum just very quickly came through, in terms of Māori having that vibrant export economy. And I'm an economist, so I do look at things from the economist perspective, but a very vibrant economy way back then. And actually talking to Māori, and I heard it was new to me, this thing called Te Tiriti, and I didn't know anything about it. For them, for Māori, it was very much a living document. It was very much relevant to Māori, however many years later. And that opened my eyes, and having thought through that and having been exposed to all of those different discussions in korero like here, and actually read Te Treaty and recognise the difference in the conversations and the differences between Te Treaty and the treaty, and latterly picking up on He Whakaputanga, you get the message to me that it's the other side would like it to be us versus them. And they want the migrant community to be with us, because they want to divide us all up and say, well, you don't have anything to do with Māori because you're Indian, and you don't have anything to do with Māori because you're Chinese, and you don't have anything to do with Māori because you're somebody else. And it's very much the tactic of the colonisers that we've heard so much about, is to divide everybody up into small groups so they can't recognize the commonalities and the unity that we all have together. And one of the core things from that economic perspective, and the relevance for today, is within the treaty, or within Te Treaty more importantly, is what I would call that social contract that enables us as migrants to come here, or as children of migrants to stay here, but it also is the contract under which we operate economic activity. And the social contract is very much around, these are the rules and the laws, and if you abide by those rules and laws, you'll get paid back with whatever it might be, whether it be a good job, or whether it be a good living and a lifestyle, or opportunities for your children, and all of that. It all goes together in that package. You can't pick and choose which parts of that contract you want to abide by. And that's what Māori have repeated to me for so long, is you will talk about contracts, but there's this fundamental underlying, and it's not even contract in a legal term, and I'd like to use a different term, but I don't know. Someone could help me. But it's an agreement, and you can't pick and choose those rules. It's an agreement that was there from a long time ago. And Māori, despite what everybody else might say, Māori fully expect those rules and obligations to be fulfilled. That's the way they have lived their lives. And you can argue whether it's 180 or 150 or soon it'll be 200 years ago. It doesn't matter. The agreement is still there. It's part of a social contract, and I would argue a very vibrant and positive social contract about how we can build a nation for the future, which enables us all to be different but in the same place, recognising our own value sets, but recognising also the commonalities in the value sets. And one of the things I'm really keen to hear about is the commonalities around communities, rather than the individuals that some side like to highlight, but the commonalities around community and what communities expect and want and desire and contribute is very much at that core of Te Treaty, that I think we'd be silly to be on the wrong side of history for, we as migrant communities. Thank you, Bev. Happy to pass on. I'm sure there's more I could say, but I'll leave it there.
You're right, Ganesh. I think we're just all going to breathe now. It's very focused on your flow of the range of thoughts. And in terms of that key thing around the word contract, really, and expectations, obligations, and rights, it's flowing through from what you were saying. So finally, I'm going to extend an invitation to Anjum to provide her thoughts. And then I think we will go through to then thinking about looking at the questions and answers with respect to our audience. So please do put your questions in, and we'll get through what we can. So Anjum, I invite you back to speak with the group.
Oh, thank you, Bev. I wanted to start with the notion of belonging, particularly for ethnic minority communities of colour, because for me growing up, the inherent racism we faced was that we don't and cannot belong here. And it's reflected in language. So I was very interested in listening to you, Ganesh, talking about migrants and the children of migrants, because migrants sometimes becomes a placeholder for people of colour when they don't want to say it, but they mean it. And of course, there's nothing wrong with being a migrant, but I think we should be precise. because migrants come from all countries and can be Pākehā and not,
Exactly.
right? There's this notion of visible and invisible migrants.
Yeah.
But for my kids who are born here, they're not migrants, and they don't need to be called children of migrants because Pākehā kids are not called that way.
Exactly.
Right. So, and so
Exactly.
that sort of everyday racism is played out when, when we're fighting, it's played out in education, health, justice, equity, everything. So when we're fighting for our place here, it really can be in tension with mana whenua who have a sense of belonging due to being Indigenous to here, and Pākehā, who seem to have this really inherent sense of belonging that comes from colonisation. So you'll hear them get up and say, well, I'm a sixth generation New Zealander, as if that means that they're more of a New Zealander than me somehow, or that they have more rights, or that their words should carry more weight. But they don't then say, oh, but Māori have been here longer than that, so therefore their words carry more weight than mine. Is not acknowledged at all. So I find that really interesting. And so what happens is that ethnic communities of colour are often pit against each other, right? And the colonial project works on you've all heard divide and rule. That's how it works. And that's how it has worked across countries. And it's still working now to try and pit our groups against each other. And so we have actors that are going around actively saying, well, you suffer racism too, and why should Māori get special treatment? Because, just because they suffer racism, so do you, and therefore, they're getting something you're not, or whatever. It's just like really pushing at that tension and division. And so for me, it is absolutely critical that Māori, Pacifica and ethnic minority communities build that sense of solidarity, and actually that we would find our belonging through Te Tiriti in a way that counteracts the racism that I've talked about. But in doing so, we also need to recognise our responsibility to uphold Te Tiriti and Indigenous rights. And the colonial project makes us fear that we would have less if we did that, when in fact justice always benefits everyone. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you, Anjum. It's really for that kind of like passionate focus on the positionality or as ethnic communities, which sometimes we don't look up and see from that broader picture. And that painted a really strong picture of the different dynamics here in Aotearoa. So thank you to the four panelists for your opening comments. We covered a range of a breadth and a depth in terms of various aspects in terms of this korero. And I think it shows that there are so many different aspects that we can think about in this space, and that sometimes they can get all tangled up. So I'm going to now shift just to a couple of questions, 2 or 3 questions as we have time, that have been posed. So the first one I'm going to ask is, so in terms of the economic perspective or social aspects, which parts of Te Tiriti would you see us migrants as part of, or would we not be either or? So I guess it's coming down to that. So where do we sit in relation to Te Tiriti? So would anyone like to speak to that?
You got if I'm allowed.
Welcome.
Thanks, Bev. I think we could go into the ins and outs of the Te Tiriti, but I think the best way that I would look at the Te Tiriti is as a whole rather than look at the bits and pieces. Because again, if you look at the bits and pieces, that's just encouraging a very narrow legalistic interpretation of it, which is what the other side would love us to go down, because that's how they can divide. Oh, you're okay over here, but not okay. Look at it from the context, given what Anjum has told us about the context of what was happening when it was signed. The totality of Te Tiriti was very much, right at the very beginning, an agreement between Māori and the Crown for the British to bring their people here. because the British wanted to bring their people here. Māori had seen, as in Kororareka, a whole lot of lawlessness. They had no authority to put laws on them. They wanted someone, because they didn't want to, at that time, they didn't want to engage in that sort of, I suppose you could call it governance. So they allowed the Brits effectively to bring their people here, but as long as you guys look after them. And that was the context, alongside a whole lot of stuff about, by the way, while you're looking after your people, you're not allowed to touch our land and everything else. You can't just wholesale take things away from us. It's in terms of where migrants or other communities who may not be Pākehā or British or Māori, it's very much in that context of an agreement that allows us to come here and allows us to settle and remain. In terms of economic activity, it very much is you are part of the economy, you're a part of a society, you're expected to contribute, you're expected to participate. And if you do all of these things, you will get benefit from being part of the community. And that's part of the community. The benefit is that you are literally part of a community and you have that sense of belonging. Part of the problem with Te Tiriti, as it's currently being, I suppose, argued about, is we've lost that overarching perspective of that it was the and it's been what's the phrase? It's been termed as the cloak that protects us. Forgive me, there's a phrase that I can't quite remember, but it's that protection element of Te Tiriti that was very much part of that agreement. Māori not only wanted to protect themselves, but wanted to protect all the others and made sure there was a mechanism for all the others that did come have that level of protection. And that still holds. You can't wipe away that agreement. There was no sunset clause on Te Tiriti.
Kia ora, thank you, Ganesh. I'm just going to make a comment which is around Danny's, and then I'll pass over to you, Danny, because I can see you're unmuting in anticipation. But when you're on your picture, you had the 1987 shift, and the 1987 shift was the bringing in of the point system and immigration policy. So that was exactly. A crown-based approach, which actually broadened the breadth and diversity of source countries who then had migrants coming into Aotearoa. So anyway, Danny, did you want to make some comments?
Only because Ganesh is an economist, and I'm a bit fragile around that area. But I did want to just stepping away from the point system, which Bev and Ganesh and Jim and others might to talk to. But I did put my head into the to the Ngāpuhi AGM today, annual general meeting, and it's quite interesting because banks and the country and the government must be looking at Ngāpuhi and all those bigger tribes because their economic power is significant now. Even taking away all the liabilities that Ganesh would know about, Ngāpuhi is now worth $92 million. And no one can stare that down and say that's not significant. It is significant. And if you put all the Māori tribes together, they are a significant economic power now. I noticed, Ganesh, that people like Westpac and that have got dedicated units now that work with Māori because that's a significant part of the New Zealand economy. And so I'm just putting that out there, Bev, just as a way forward, because I think part of the narrative here is that as people who have come here, like all our ancestors, part of our story will be to walk with all those Māori tribes and affirm them as who they are, but also affirm that they are significant and will play a major role through Indigenous knowledge, and that's us as well as migrants, to feed into a new New Zealand, and that's very, very exciting.
Kia ora, thank you, Danny. I'm actually going to now move us on to cover off a different question, and I'm seeing that there is actually a strong theme coming through some of the questions, and it's actually about responding to that one New Zealand unity kind of rhetoric that is coming through from just from some of the positioning of the proposed treaty principles bill, and how do you navigate that? How do you navigate the use of the term multiculturalism in terms of the kōrero going on, and that concept of the bicultural foundation of Aotearoa? And linked with that is that need to decolonize ourselves as ethnic communities and how we see ourselves in Aotearoa. Sorry, I think I've merged two questions together there, I suspect. Would anyone like to start some comments in response to that? Vera?
I'll take a crack at it if I can. I'm definitely sitting in a more action solutions focused way, so apologies if you wanted more theory. But in the conversations about how ethnic communities, specifically refugee and migrant communities, can engage to really embody the action that is Tu Tautoko, Titiriti o Waitangi, to stand up with tangata whenua, and how does that work in community? One of the key things is to kind of understand your positionality and your sphere of influence within community. So I'm Congolese, I'm a young woman, I'm unmarried, I'm not convincing any aunties. And that's just something I recognize by my lack of social capital in that space. But I know that if I'm engaging with young people, that is a stride that I can hit really, really well. So understanding that you're not going to hit everyone in the community, of course, it's deep, it's rich, it's incredibly complex. So understanding your position, especially if you are an older woman, an older man, this is the opportunity to kind of get those aunties and uncles on board. So using the language that they recognize, especially if your parents as well, just being able to connect on that level will make it a lot easier to engage deeply on Te Tiriti o Waitangi, as well as kind of acknowledging the gift that Te Ao Māori gives us, which is to reflect on whakapapa and on tipuna. So we're not engaging with Te Tiriti o Waitangi just because we live here, but as Danny said, we know what it means to be colonized. Most of us have this shared history. Understanding our own perspective and positions as people who have also been colonized, build that bridge for your community to relate to what is happening right here, right now, that this is not too far away to what has happened to us in the past and what is ongoing for us in the present. Understanding and connecting those struggles makes it a lot easier to deal with. And there was one particular question which you didn't ask, Bev, but I saw and I really need to answer. Convincing parents on how to care about Te Tiriti o Waitangi when they're focused on surviving with a lot of compassion. To sit in advocacy is a privilege. To sit here and pontificate and to dwell and to write, it's an immense privilege. And we all should recognize that. And engaging with people who don't have this privilege, who are focused on survival, on working, on supporting their children, you're coming with a lot of compassion. And my second recommendation is that you're coming with a story. Tell them about the people. Tell them about a person. Tell them about a singularity that they can understand. Coming with statistics, with essays, they may work for the first year university student, but if you're trying to engage with, everyday community member who might not have a lot of time in their hands, find a story that pulls on the heartstrings that captures what you're trying to say. For myself, it was engaging with my mom about the fact that she cries every single time she's on a marae because that's the only place she feels like she's at home. She understands that tikanga Māori pulls at something really spiritual and in depth in her, tapping into that feeling and explaining to her that these things are what are at risk right now. Now she cares. Now she wants to engage. Now she knows that there's something to do. So really, coming with your community with a lot of compassion, a lot of empathy, stories and connection seems to be the way forward and seems to be the most effective, in my opinion.
Kia ora, Vera, thank you so much for that. Those touchstones, really, of different ways about positioning ourselves, and also that idea of who it is that you are actually engaging with, and being mindful of the intergenerational difference in lived experience here and also the journey to here. Are there other comments that panel members would like to make? Now, I'm juggling, guys. We've got 30 questions, which, of course, I'm not going to be able to say. Thank you, Vera, for picking up some of the nuances of those, which I didn't capture together.
Yeah, I'll be really quick. Just in terms of, we have a place in Te Tiriti because we're here, right? And the fact that we're here gives us that place. And And in terms of some actions, I guess we go about it in a more structured way. So we have our Bridging Cultures program that we're hoping to do a few more next year, which is where we ask marae, work with marae, to host local communities, particularly ethnic Pasifika, but also Pākehā communities come, and we get people to talk about Te Tiriti. We get mana whenua to give their local history of that marae and the lands around, and then have this conversation around what racism looks like for all of our communities and so on. We also, of course, do Te Tiriti training, but I think, yeah, it is really, I'd just like to add on to what Vera is saying. It is in the space of conversation that the understanding happens. And for you to open that space of conversation and bringing the aroha to it, because, oh my God, it's so easy to get angry. It is, I mean, naturally, if you're not getting angry about some of the stuff that you heard at the beginning, then like that is a natural and normal response. But when we're trying to engage people to think about it, we need to find those points of commonality, the points of drawing them into the experience, because inherently, once they understand, it's much harder to ignore. That's what I've found anyway.
Kia ora,
I
thanks.
just add fraction more in there, and just picking up on Anjum and Vigora, and I suppose the key thing around the multicultural, bicultural, and it's that us versus them. I think in conversing with my parents and others, it's very much getting others to understand this is not anybody trying to take away your culture. It's not actually it's not a competition. And I'll put it out there quite openly. Māori have never said that my culture is wrong or that my culture needs to be assimilated to theirs. But I've had a very different message from the other side. Pākehā have always wanted us to assimilate. They're comfortable with us being there, but as long as we don't outperform them, and as long as we adopt their business models. And going back to you, Danny, about all these new businesses and the banks suddenly becoming interested in Māori business, it's because they are, I would argue, because some of them are threatened with a competing business model. They want Māori to assimilate their business model to the Western business model. That's what they want to bring it. And so part of the challenge, or not the challenge, part of the conversation is this place is strong enough to have more than one or two cultures. This place, Aotearoa in the 21st century, will thrive if we can continue to work together to have more than one or two, to build on the strengths and the opportunities from all of us together. And that's the wonderful thing that Te Tiriti could give us, as opposed to any other part of the world where it is very much an us versus them. And if you want to go to another part of the world, you've got to adopt their model, or you've got to adopt their language and all that. I think we've got the chance to do things differently here, and it's not giving up our culture or being one of them. It is very much unapologetically being able to exercise our own differences and our own way of life alongside others, and recognizing the strengths of all of us.
Kia ora, Danny. Ganesh, sorry. I was thinking, I'm just conscious of the time, and unless anyone of the panelists has a burning comment that I would like to make, I'm going to shift us to the next question in our webinar, because coming through some of the questions posed in that function was that idea of having a sense of hope for the future, and how can we have that. And that was part of our korero in developing up the format for this webinar, was actually, what does the future look like? And having a sense of hope and an aspirational sense of, in Aotearoa, what are the possibilities that we could work towards? So the question is, from an aspirational point of view, what would a Te Tiriti-based Aotearoa look like in 2040? So, Ganesh, you're already here. I will ask you to begin.
I've sort of touched on that, I think, already, and it is very much around, I suppose recognizing that the world is changing. And I know we're all terrified of the world changing, and it's human nature. We don't like change. Well, most of us don't like change, especially when you get old like me. We want to stay in our comfort zone and hope that, go back to the good old days, which is, going to remind people that they actually weren't that good the old days, but never mind. The world is changing. A lot of it's outside of our control. We've got to figure out whether we're minority ethnic communities or whether we're Māori or Pākehā or just residents of Aotearoa, however you want to pitch yourself, we have to deal with that changing world. We can't pretend that we can carry on as we've always done and pretend the world is not changing, because that is not going to lead us to a very good space, because there are a lot of changes that will be imposed or forced on us if we carry on blindly thinking we can carry on doing what we've always done. So I'm very much in the recognize the world is changing, the old world, whether it be the North Atlantic, the US, Europe thing, very much part of that old world. And I would argue the last gasps are almost there in terms of trying to maintain their privileged positions in the world. There's a big opportunity for us here in the South Pacific to recognize, are we a European nation or are we an Asian nation? We're actually a Pacific nation, literally by geography, let alone by demographics. Into the future, we're going to be an even more Pacific nation. Let's grasp that. With Te Tiriti Foundation, we recognise that there's more than one culture/ethnicity that made up this nation right from the very start. Let's pick that up and go forward and proactively figure out a way to make our case in the world. We'll make a lot of mistakes along the way, but that shouldn't stop us saying, look, we're here strongly, proudly as Aotearoa in the 21st century, unapologetically multicultural, multi-ethnic, etc., etc. We've got the Unapologetic Te Tiriti Foundation, which recognises a partnership between Māori and the Crown. We're going to have to do something on the constitutional stuff. I'll leave that for the lawyers. But if we have that open acknowledgement that we actually want to go forward together, and it sounds cringy and it sounds sort of, some people say I'm naive, but we've got to go there. Otherwise, the world is going to get really scary if we don't know where we want to be. We've got to be confident and strong in ourselves. That's why my parents came here, to give me a better life. It's why all of us want to stay here, to give our children a better life. So let's go for it from a position of strength. And that position of strength is very much that sense of belonging, why we're here.
Kia ora, thank you, Ganesh. I'm just going to move through quite quickly. I love that your final couple of sentences was very heartwarming, that sense of belonging, and that idea of strength, actually, because there is strength in our diversity and strength of us in us together. So now I'm just going to ask Danny to say a few words.
I was just wondering whether my fellow panel brother and sisters, great. I just bouncing off something that you brought up, Ganesh, firstly. I was in my community, and there's a difference between in my community, Bev, around, or our community around our older Chinese community and our younger ones. There's quite a difference about our village culture, which belongs very much to those who came to New Zealand, and our culture sort of stagnated in one sort of way, and we lived through our old village norms. And the young people who belong to quite a different world and are probably a little bit more informed and have gone through a different education system. And what I want to say there is that I don't know whether our panel members, I was brought up with this sort of mantra about, oh, Danny, we have a very strong work ethic and we've got to be better than the Pākehā, basically. Do better than them and don't fly your flags too high. We're just going to get on with the business. And I don't know if it's something that you shared in your communities, but I just go there, Ganesh, because it made me think of that. We're brought up with this mantra. But in saying that too, I really want to talk about, on a reflection of the hikoi, which many of you would have joined, and just reflections on that. And many of us would have joined that at different spots around the country. And a couple of things stood out for me. One is about the positivity of being Māori and about peace and loving each other and staying positive in the eye or in the face of this coalition government, which is hammering our people, Māori people. And so and I think a lot of that has to do with demographics. Māori by definition now are defined by young people. Most of them live in Auckland and will never make it back to the marae. So there's that sense of positivity, and within that positivity also, I think one of the mantras that they used at the hikoi was mokopuna led, but tupuna fed, defined by the young people who are the future, but also fed and supported by their elders. So there's a whole lot of cultural nuances in there that are very, very healthy. And with that, I think also the recognition that Indigenous knowledge that we all bring as migrants is part and parcel of the solution of a new New Zealand. And I think that's something that I take away in my heart for all of us, is that we as Indigenous people have never really been called upon. It's been one size fits all and played to that narrative. But I think we all bring a beauty and a genius to a new looking New Zealand. And I think, as Ganesh you just said before, I think the government's threatened about that. They can only see one way, and it's their way. I think we have something very beautiful to offer this. Finally, in that, Bev, I just think about the Honourable Nanaia Mahuta, who spoke about realignment, and Ganesh pointed to this in his last kōrero, and that was that no, we are, if you collapse time, we're actually part of the South Pacific, and the South Pacific takes us into Southeast Asia, and of course, we all are part of this new way of being, not part of Europe, but we are part of Southeast Asia. So I think there's a whole lot of potential in that we can work together with Māori as ethnic communities and reaffirming that sense of realignment that the Nanaia Mahuta, I think, talked about in her time, that we need to realign as people of the Pacific and of Southeast Asia. So I've got a lot of hope. I think that there are better things and great things to come.
Good. Thank you, Danny. I think what's coming through is that sense of location. Where are we located? That bringing through of history, but also that celebration and strengthening of our identities as diverse ethnic communities and having our voice and making that stand. And I'm now going to pass us through to Vera for her thoughts.
Thank you, Bev. Admittedly, the two words in this question that bring me the most kind of grimace, aspirational and 2040. And I feel like that's also a very Gen Z response. Just thinking towards the future just gives me the heebie-jeebies. But I guess the really key word that comes to mind is momentum. The hope is that when we're sitting in a Titiriti-based Aotearoa in 2040, it's because we have capitalized on this momentum in these moments right now. The phrase, or at least the anecdote that I've been saying about the Treaty Principles Bill is usually you have to convince people there are things going wrong, and that's half of the advocacy work. And at least in this current government, they do all of the awfulness out in the open, so no convincing is required. We're put in positions right now where we have so many opportunities to activate. And the hope is that by 2040, we have really taken all of those opportunities on board. And we've found a way to kind of understand our role as Tāwiwi within this Titiriti context in a way that is so deeply integrated to our ways of being and knowing and operating as people who occupy this land, that it doesn't become a one-off. It's not a significant wow event because it's our everyday. The hope is that it becomes so normal. It's that it's the water that we swim in, you know? So when I'm thinking about 2040, I'm thinking about a future where there is this equal investment in Indigenous rights because we recognize that it's a core necessity for a thriving Aotearoa. There's no other way to frame what it means for us to be successful without having core, like solidified Indigenous rights at its center, because how can it ever work in any other way? And really acknowledging that generational shift that we're going to see, Generation Z and Generation Alpha really coming into our own, stepping into decision making and into spheres of influence. We can expect to see intersectional collectivist action more and more, growing from the foundations that have been set right now. So Asians supporting Tino Rangatiratanga, African Diaspora for Indigenous Rights New Zealand. These are all the foundation points. And it's really exciting to look towards the future, but I'm always really called to think of myself as, an ancestor. What legacy am I leaving for the people behind me? And people tend to go, you're 25, you're thinking a bit too far ahead. But, this is the way that we kind of build those foundations for the future. This is how we create a space for us to thrive. And one of the questions was looking at how do we focus on giving the future generations hope around a titiriti-based future? And it's by doing the work right now. Hope is something that we can put into something. If you are doing the work, we can have hope in your actions. If we know that you're supporting us, if we know that you're championing the work in community, if we know that you're the ally, you're activating, we can have hope in that. And it's so interesting because people focus so much more on, being inspirational so that way we feel like we can do something. If you start doing something now, young people, future generations, we know that we can, because sometimes the trails that we have to blaze can be far, far too much for us at our young age. So knowing that we can lean on everyone around us in community, everyone who is sitting here in this webinar, that, we all are living on the exact same frequency, that everyone's taking their part, that's going to give us hope. That's going to give us the motivation that we need for this titiriti-based future.
Kia ora, thanks, Vera. I mean, it's coming through that actually, here is a window of opportunity in a way for us to really become informed, think about these issues and start trying to work through them together in our diversity. So now I'm going to pass to Anjum to also make some more comments around this question.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really, we get disheartened a lot by the pace of what's happening under this government. But one, we have to remember that governments come and go, right? And secondly, we have to remember that the power is in the people, right? And so when you put your energy into people, that will influence the government as well. And I guess that's where we situate ourselves. But nonetheless, we also, so we need to fight back for the now. And the Hikoi was a beautiful example of that. We need to keep fighting back for the now, but we also need to keep prepping for the future, keep planting those seeds. And where I wanted to start really was, in terms of our vision to 2040, is Mātiki Mai, which is the piece of research that was undertaken and led by Matua Moana Jackson and via Margaret Mutu. There should be a link in the chat, but it was a piece of work where they went and talked to 6,000 people, and there's a lot of other amazing people that were part of that whole journey, Veronica Tawhai and others. But it's about constitutional transformation, and it gives us these constitutional models to build on. And when you look at the report, it talks a lot about the values, but in terms of the model of having the Kāwanatanga sphere and the Tino Rangatiratanga sphere. And within the Tino Rangatiratanga sphere sits all of our tangata whenua aspirations, their equal rights to power and decision making. We sit firmly on the Kāwanatanga side of that sphere, that treaty model effectively, but we are marginalised along with other communities. It's not just marginalisation by virtue of our race, our colour, our nationalities, our visa status, but also by our differing abilities, by our gender and sexualities, by our size, whether we're thin or not thin, or whatever it is. Like there's all these marginalizations that sit there. And that is one of the spaces where we really have to be pushing for our rights there. And in the end, when we think about it, it is not the responsibility of Māori to push for those rights. But it's lovely if they can be allies to us in that journey. And, really the hard work has to be done in terms of systemic, institutional structure change. And what we need is also our Pākehā friends to be on that journey with us, to recognise what that looks like and feels like, and think about how they can participate in making that kāwanatanga sphere better. And then our role also, as we continue that fight, is how do we be allies to Tino Rangatiratanga sphere? Because that is also, it's a mutual responsibility to each other. Because when we each uphold each other, everyone raises. So for me, that is the framework where the hope lies, and where we can really aim for a better future for us. And and so our team, we're currently doing a what we call Mātiki Tāhono, which is our Mātiki Mai book club, and we hope to be doing that again next year. So if you're interested in these kinds of things, and it's that, I always say, I'm changing the world one roomful at a time. And that's what it is. That's what I can do. I can't change everything everywhere all at once because I'm not Michelle Yeoh, but, I can influence where I am and where I stand, and everyone else can too. And one roomful of time from a lot of people has a whole lot of ripple effects.
Kia ora. Thank you, Anjum. I'm conscious of the time. It's now 6:43. There was a question that I was going to pose. We've covered and touched the sides of quite a lot of the questions that have been put through, but there is one around that concept of how to relate with Pākehā as tau iwi and as allies potentially for the future, because we are looking to a future with changing demographics, and as an invitation from the Crown, we are part of the current Tangata Tiriti frame of reference. Are there any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think we have to engage with them as partners in the conversation, right? And there are hearts and minds to be changed. Let's be frank. And there's a lot of people that are putting out a lot of stuff that is creating division. And so the answer to that is not to create more division, as far as I can see it is, but who can we bring in? Yeah. And I think really that will be most effective.
I was lucky enough to attend the graduation ceremony at a Māori university, Te Wānanga last week. And one thing that stood out was the number of Pākehā recipients of Māori degrees. And one thing I think this current government has not, or they might have realised, but failed to understand, is that I think there's a new wave where we have so many Pākehā allies who have been educated and are aware and are pro positivity, really, pro Māori, pro tangata whenua, and even more than that, it's their children and our grandchildren who have been recipients of a new education system where we're being bicultural in one sense, or understanding things Māori is so much deeper than when we were young. So I think there's a brand new wave, and I think it can only be positive for the future, but it's not. You won't be able to turn that back. I think it's there, and it's being activated.
think so too, Danny. And I'd share a snippet from my history, which it was not that long ago when I remember getting up in the middle of the night to watch the All Black Test match. It was 1999, and I remember Hiniwehi Mohi, as she was at the time, coming out and singing the Te Reo version of our national anthem without any English. And I vividly remember, this was 25 years ago. I vividly remember Talkback Radio the day after. It was ropeable, right? It's that. No legislation required. There's no legislation saying we've got two versions of the national. We just kept doing it, and people over time sort of, there are still those obviously out in talkback land. There'll be some still standing up, making a kerfuffle. But as you say, there's a whole new generation where it's just shrug shoulders. What's everybody getting upset about? It's part of who we are. Whether they've learned it at school or not, they know that New Zealand at Aotearoa has Māori. And by the way, it's the only place in the world that has Māori. And by the way, it's good, etc., etc. And that's the big difference. And that's actually a relatively short period of time to have that behavioural change where just those little things happen that actually is that momentum that Vera was talking about that sets and train a whole lot of things. So it doesn't necessarily have to be legislation that we're after. It's changing in people's thoughts and mindsets. And I go back to the hikoi that we just had. And I fully agree that it was a celebration. And I just compare that to my very first, and I've been on a lot, but my very first protest that I was ever on when I was a young 18-year-old in my first year at university. And it was the day after, or was it the day of the police going on to Bastion Point, as it was then known. And there I was trying to hide in a group of about 25 students marching down Lambton Quay, and the response was pretty ropeable, if you like, with things were thrown at us, etc., etc., etc. But compare that experience to the new experience of the hikoi. It was a celebration. It wasn't a protest. It was a statement. We're here. Māori and Pākehā and Tangata Treaty together are here. Do whatever you like legislation-wise, but we're here and you're not going to get away with anything. And so that's the engagement with anybody and everybody, and whether it's Pākehā or Māori or ethnic communities or something. Don't buy into their conversation, because obviously they want to divide us up. That's how they've always won. The old colonial trick of divide and rule, as Anjum said. We've got to get past that. Don't play into that game. Recognise that, for the positives, we're here, celebrate it, and look for the allies. And actually, we've got there are quite a few allies now, a lot more than there ever used to be, and it's only going to grow.
Good. Thanks, Ganesh. I think you've started segueing into the final segment of this webinar, which is for each of you to have a minute each just to put forward some final parting thoughts from the session. So we'll begin with you, Ganesh.
I've said enough. My final parting shorts. We haven't said much about it, but please do put a submission in on the treaty principles bill. Do it positively, proactively. Don't feel apologetic about it. Tell your story. It doesn't have to be legal. I've put one in and it's only about 3 pages and it's got no legals about it. We haven't to go into we don't have to go into the clauses of the treaty or all of that. It's just a statement of, from my perspective, what I've said today. The treaty gives me the opportunity to stay in Aotearoa. It's use your own words. It's an agreement. It's a contract, or call it what you like, but it's there. You're not allowed to touch it. Let's go forward and put that to one side. I cannot encourage you even more. Just put something in. Just make your statement. Be part of the community that you are now. That gives you that sense of belonging. You have as much right as everybody else to put in that submission, and I encourage you to do so. Kia ora.
Good. And I'm going to pass this now to Danny.
I look forward with my my brother and my sisters here and everyone else who's joined this webinar to exactly what you said, Ganesh. Write a submission. I'll get onto that tomorrow. It's been on my mind. So that's the first. But secondly, I really look forward to something again I picked up from the Hikoi is that I'm looking forward to a new Aotearoa New Zealand where we can support tangata whenua and bring our world of Indigenous knowledge to it. And there's a beauty there which is untapped. And I'm really excited about that. I think there's a huge opportunity here for us all to weave a new way and a new way of being. And I think as brothers and sisters, we can do that. We're well placed to do that. So a whole new world awaits us, and it's exciting. So yeah, I'm looking forward to tomorrow, and I'm hopeful. I think Anjum, you talked about hope. I'm hopeful for the future. I think we have a very, very good future. We just need to bide our time and get through to the end of this year and see what the new year brings. So yeah, thank you, Bev.
Good. Thank you, Danny. And Vera?
Thank you. Oh, I was just like in awe that I forgot that I also have to speak. I think the big things coming out of me is really that overwhelming reminder that we all have our part to play. So initially in those kind of early beginnings of engaging with Te Tiriti o Waitangi, thinking that I don't have a part in the conversation, I don't have a responsibility. I absolutely do. We all do. Understanding the role that I get to play in my community to educate others, to engage with others on this topic, being able to show up as an ally, understanding what that means, listening to tangata whenua. That's an example that I get to play in my community to be a role model. And I hope that's something that we can all engage in, thinking of the future that we want to create and actively making it today, that all of us, as you know, from our different communities can easily and actively come together to engage on not only this, but all forms of oppression that threatens any single one of us, any type of marginalization or discrimination. Ganesh, you said it really well, which is the fact that divide and conquer has always been the way. So we cannot allow them to divide us. We have to use the stories of our people that connect us in order to propel us into a future that we actually want to see, the ones that we want to live in, the one that we want our future generations to live in. And to remember that, like Anjum said, governments are governments and the power will always belong to the people. So as long as that's where we put our energy, our focus, our motivation, we will be able to survive almost absolutely everything. Also, you know, put in a submission to oppose the Treaty Principles Bill. This, you know, it's always talking about the future, but the future happens through our actions today. So everywhere you look around you, when there's an opportunity to act, take that, because that actively forms our future. Thank you.
Thank you, Vera. And I'm just now going to pass. I'm just moving us along because of the time. Anjum.
Yeah, kia ora. Yeah, I'm going to lay down a wero, and particularly for our ethnic minority communities, that we actually, and it's for everyone really when I think about it, we actually have one degree of choice here. And that degree of choice is that we either uphold the colonial project or we don't. There's not 2 degrees of choices. There's not any other choices. And we have to think about what upholding the colonial project means for our institutions, our structures, our organisational policies, the way we structure leadership. All of that comes from a particular worldview, and it is not set in stone. So are you going to be part of the change, or are you going to be part of the upholding of embedded injustices that have carried on? That's it.
Kia ora, Anjum. And I'm a bit speechless, actually, at the richness, at the clarity in which the panelists, all of you, have put forward, your thoughts, your messages, your comments and ways about thinking about Te Tiriti, about where we stand as ethnic communities, the current context, and also that hope for the future. I found that very heartwarming. I'm hoping that the attendees at the webinar did too. So I'm going to thank our esteemed thought leaders for sharing their time, sharing their thoughts, and thinking about the questions and the topics and how we could bring this webinar together in a way which would resonate with viewers. I'd like to thank the attendees for coming along and listening to this. This is being recorded, so if we're hoping to get the recording out in the next couple of days, on the webpage we will also add a list of different resources if you want to look further into your understanding about Te Tiriti and about some of the ethnic community aspects which were raised at this webinar. I'd also like to thank the people behind the scenes. So that's the project team from Inclusive Aotearoa Collective and also Community Research. And we also got a ring-in to help us with some of the back engine sort of mahi. So that's Storm Collins, Ray Christian, Eve Cookson and Grace Gasson. Yeah, all went extremely smoothly. Thank you guys. Thanks everyone for the team effort. We've also got a feedback survey, which will take about 3 minutes. We really cut right there. So we've got 4 questions for you to answer, and that's there now in the chat. And I think that's where we're at. Such rich korero, that challenge, I think, is there. There's an opportunity now, actually, perversely, for us to come together and to have our voice and visibility heard, and through putting in a submission. And we will have resources about how you can do that as well on our webpage. And we'll be sending out a notice to all attendees and all registrants when the recording is up. So I think that's us for now. As we thank you so much. We were conscious it's the 16th of December. We're rapidly heading towards the end of 2024. So I want to wish you all, on behalf of the panelists, Community Research and Inclusive and Tahono, the Inclusive Aotearoa Collective, all the very best, and to go well to the end of the year and with hope for 2025, and enjoy your holiday break and festive season. So kia ora everyone. I'm going to now take us to a closing karakia. Ko mutu a mātou mahi mō tēnei wā. Manakitia mai mātou katoa. O mātou hoa, o mātou whānau, aio ki te aorangi. Our work has finished for the time being. Protect us all, our friends, our family, and peace to the universe. Kia ora everyone.